Do you want to kick
We're
us off?
here. Sure.
All right.
Today we're going to talk about something that I am excited to get a deeper level of knowledge on from somebody who you been in the space for a while, and I think has a lot to contribute on this topic. And the topic is stablecoins. We've heard a lot of things in the news. This is like the unbundling of traditional financial services. Starts with like tokenization and stablecoins, and kind of displacement of existing payments networks and all these like big kind of topics that could have major repercussions to the industry. How do I, as a CEO, think about the realities of where the space is at right now, and what type of initial steps should I be thinking about taking in my business as this space continues to evolve? So,
That's loaded. Um, yeah, look, I mean, I am infinitely curious about where all of this goes. We've got about $150 billion of stablecoin, which really just means a representation of a fiat currency on a blockchain. That $150 billion is almost entirely a representation of US dollars.
so that type of value, is that kind of what you like? That's like in circulation equivalent. Is that
Yeah,
kind of how you think about that? Okay,
exactly, exactly.
right.
And for comparison, I think there's about $760 million sitting in individuals' demand and notice deposit accounts in Canada right now. Sorry, million. Oh, we're gonna have to cut that for sure. But nevertheless, it's billion. But nevertheless, there's $150 billion of USD represented on chain. And that roughly breaks down to two players. One is Tether, which is a very opaque organization that is not based in any sort of a well-regulated developed market. And then the second is Circle, which is based in the United States, is now a public company. Circle represents about 50 billion US dollars on chain. And when you go to their website, they have an attestation of their reserves, one-to-one to the stablecoin that has been minted on chain through themselves directly or through the set of partners that they allow to mint this stuff with them. And they take the US dollars and they basically buy US treasuries and hold a certain amount of US dollars in demand accounts. And that's how they manage the liquidity of it all. Now, for the most part, if you're running a fintech business, you probably shouldn't be thinking much about this. Of course, there are folks that are thinking about it, like PayPal has their own version of US dollar stablecoin called PayPal USD. And so all that to say, you're probably only thinking about this if you are actually in the crypto space. And the best representation that I've seen of this, and I think I'll probably just like share my screen and show you. The best representation of the use cases that I've seen for this is a company called Sling Money. The reason that stablecoins are important is twofold. One is people want access to US dollars. And in some markets in South America and in places like Turkey where their local currencies have high degrees of inflation and there are often restrictions on how much US dollars you can buy and hold through their regulated financial system. Individuals are looking for ways to hold US dollars because it's safer. I mean, even you and I, when you have US dollars, you don't really want to convert it back to Canadian unless you absolutely have to, right? And so you like to have a US dollar account and hopefully you're earning interest on those US dollars. And so that's use case number one. But the second use case is really remittances. And I'm fascinated by these folks. So this is Sling Money. They're based out of the UK. The website's absolutely wild, of course.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's effectively a competitor to Wise. But in the background, what they're doing is they're using stablecoin for the remittance flows between different markets instead of having to have a correspondent banking network where you're holding US dollars over here and maybe like Turkish lira over here. And then you have to maintain the liquidity across all of that correspondent banking network like Wise does.
Wow.
And so they think that there's a real efficiency gain here. I think what happens long term, though, which I find very fascinating, is rather than Sling money, use USDC or some other stablecoin that they don't control in order to power the settlement flows. They'll issue their own stablecoin. They'll take in the fiat currency that is backing that stablecoin, and then they'll put it in a money market fund. And their whole business model will be about earning yield on that fiat currency, which they're holding in that money market fund. And so what you'll see is effectively money move from that correspondent banking network to a money market fund and out of the banking system, which I think is fascinating. So
it's interesting. So listen, you're doing a great job at building the intrigue here. You're kind of focused in on businesses that are building like business models off of like this new technology, right? And do you think that instead of like rewiring the way a business does business, like you're more looking at creating businesses off of the backs of stablecoins?
yeah, like, I mean, this is a pretty loose collection of thoughts, right? Because I think to your point, it's a function of the maturity of the ecosystem. Stablecoins, I think, are probably the killer app for blockchain right now. And that cycle has probably just begun.
Yeah.
There's some new regulation that came out in Europe in respect of how stablecoin issuance should be handled. And all that to say, the regulatory environment is becoming more clear, which is going to make it much more accessible for traditional fintechs to develop a perspective and to figure out how they want to use this as an opportunity to reshape maybe the economics or the infrastructure of, a certain set of functionality. Remittances is kind of an obvious one, right? So if you were to send money to a friend in the United States right now, I would guess that there is a 75% chance that that friend has a Robinhood account. Let's say you probably have a Wealthsimple account. They probably have a Robinhood account. Great. Well, both of those institutions, if you will, can send and receive USDC. Their customers can send and receive USDC within those platforms. For me to acquire USDC on Wealthsimple and send it to a friend in the United States who uses Robinhood, that is a much better experience than sending a wire transfer. Now, is it a better experience than using Wise? Probably not today. But in the future, it could be. And if Wealthsimple and Robinhood are already handling cryptocurrency, if they already have the infrastructure to do that money movement, just like they have the infrastructure to do money movement on the ACH and EFT rails respectively, then they can create abstraction on top of that and sort of remove the crypto component of it, but just use that as a mechanism for real-time settlement.
Yeah.
So I do think that eventually... but we're still super early.
I guess what I always find interesting too is typically there's a player that comes in through one way or another, kind of drives that mainstream adoption. I'm also curious on like who that's going to be. Somebody with like a wider base with a variety of different use cases who probably has already established trust and loyalty. It might actually, based on what you just described, really take a number of players stepping up and offering this interoperability to be able to move these stable coins really simply through the UX side of things.
Yeah, and that's the story of blockchain and the story of stablecoin as well. It's a naturally networked product, and because the network that it exists within and on is open, those players can join one by one. You don't have to have an industry association that joins together and says, we're all going to start doing something in some new way. And so what you've seen with any fintech business that is handling crypto today is they have some wallet infrastructure under the covers. There's a company called Fireblocks that is likely powering 80-90% of those fintechs and the way that they move and custody cryptocurrency. And so that infrastructure already exists. They're already running parallel infrastructure for crypto money movement and custody in the same way that they have infrastructure for fiat money movement and custody. And so that's the beauty of it, is these things can happen kind of slow then suddenly. and a fintech's ability to adopt crypto or stablecoin in this case for more than just a equities trading like use case is really going to be about abstraction.
Right. So we started kind of pretty broad, and I want to get into actually just looking at this through a Canadian lens as well, see if there's anything unique or different going on in our own marketplace. But aside from the remittance use case, there's a lot of chatter about this potentially being disruptive to the traditional networks. I guess that would be more from like a commerce perspective.
Jeez. I'll tell you about a couple things that are happening right now. I don't know that I have a super crisp perspective on the impact that blockchain has more broadly on Visa and Mastercard. And they're very engaged in the space. And they have been for quite some time. And that goes all the way from, research and the development of white papers for and patents. All the way to the things that they're so well known for in the fintech ecosystem, which is being the network partner for a fintech that wants to issue a card on top of another regulated institution. So one of the things that's kind of interesting is very recently there was an announcement from one of the largest, most well-known companies in the crypto space called Consensus. They own the Metamask wallet. They have just announced that they are going to issue a card that allows a user to spend from their on-chain balance. Now, is that alone valuable? I don't think so. Visa and Mastercard are interested in expanding the ways in which a card can be used to access spending power, and there is spending power on-chain.
Let's zoom into Canada a little bit. Anything different or unique about what's going on at home here versus maybe some of the things we just talked about globally?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about US dollars being represented on chain is that it effectively allows the Americans to increase the demand for the US dollar. And if you believe that US treasuries are, the best collateral in the world, the ability to represent that as a token and export that globally is likely a very good thing for the US dollar and the US government. And so there isn't a lot of activity in other markets because the demand for other currencies is really going to be localized, and it's going to be very closely tied to the commerce use cases. In Canada, there are two stablecoin issuers that I am aware of. One is a company called Paytree. They issue a stablecoin called CAD-C. The other one is a company called Stablecorp, and they issue a stablecoin called QCAD. Now, interestingly, Coinbase let it slip. I don't think they intended for this press release to go out, and I cannot find any evidence of it online. And if I showed you the links that I could find about this Coinbase is going to list QCAD announcement, I wouldn't even pull them up because you would look at these publications and go like, that doesn't seem real, right? We all have to be very media critical these days. But all that to say, it looks like Coinbase has asked for guidance from Canadian Securities Administrators and CIRO about listing QCAD at some point later this year. Now, is it going to have much utility in the Coinbase ecosystem for a Canadian at launch? No, but the fact that it is there and it exists and creates the conditions for Coinbase and others to try to create some demand for this thing, and then hold those dollars in a money market fund and benefit from the economics of that rather than those dollars sitting in a bank partner who's going to take some of those economics. I mean, I think that's pretty interesting. QCAD today is like $169,000 of circulation. CAD-C is, I think, 1.2 million is the last figure that I saw. So, I mean, we're talking about very, very small numbers here, but the Canadian Securities Administrators did release some guidance in October of last year. They effectively have said that, a stable coin denominated in US dollars or Canadian dollars backed fully by reserves in that same currency is sort of above board for them. They're willing to look at those particular instances, and so I am expecting that Coinbase and maybe some others will support a Canadian dollar stablecoin this year. Will it have much utility? Probably not, but it's a good step forward.
Excellent. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of good little steps forward here. I was reading the other day, Larry Flank's Blackrock CEO, and he was asked a question, I think it was related to just like the Ethereum ETF. And he said, listen, it's a great step forward. And all of these little pieces are just kind of like trust building blocks. Anything else that you'd like to leave us with?
Worth pulling up the Circle sort of transparency page on their website to just hammer that point home, which if you
Okay.
look in the bottom, the Circle Reserve Fund is an SEC registered government money market fund. They hold short dated US Treasuries and cash, of course. And then down here, the Portfolio Reserve Fund treasury purchases are done with the Bank of New York Mellon and are managed by BlackRock.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly it, right? Like BlackRock now has a fund called the Biddle Fund, BUIDL. Even hard for me to say all these years
Yeah.
later. They now have a fund of tokenized U.S. Treasuries. The fund is permissioned, meaning there's I think 18 wallets that hold these assets. There's about $500 million in assets there, and I think it's just worth hammering that point home that the big money is here. And I said this to somebody the other day. I don't think financial institutions over the next 10 years can afford to miss AI or blockchain, because
Right.
these are fundamental shifts in the way that they operate, and they represent an opportunity to remove cost from the system, and it's already starting to happen. Blockchain clearly playing second fiddle to AI today, though.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, to commemorate this, I am going to go and purchase my first stablecoin so that I can just always remember this day and time. I'll post my receipt.